Today's episode is about brothers. I'm familiar with this terrain because I have two. And we spent a huge portion of our wonder years battling over just about anything. The front seat, the biggest piece of duck, and the always fresh who started it. But in our early teens, we found a board game called Diplomacy. It was one of those take-over-the-world games. But instead of rolling dice to win territories, you had to convince other players to back up the orders you wrote for your armies, with orders they wrote for theirs. So after every round of reading out a bunch of orders and tallying the ground won or lost, there'd be 20 minutes of one-on-one meetings, the diplomacy part, to persuade someone to support your battles and promise to support theirs. The catch was, when it came time to write up the orders, you could do anything you wanted. So at some key moment in every game, there would be a double cross. I played this a lot with my older brother and his friends, and when that critical moment came, my brother and I always ended up allying with each other and double-crossing the friends. Blood was simply thicker than water. There were few bonds more powerful than siblings. That's how it was for the guy we're going to meet today, Xavier Amador, at least with his older brother Henry. As kids, the two of them survived a real war, not a board game version. In the aftermath, and in a new land, they grew close. Henry was the kind of big brother every little brother dreamed of. He took Xavier under his wing. He was generous, patient, kind. He taught Xavier useful things and shared his successes. When they grew up, Xavier went off to college 2,500 miles away. One night in his senior year, he got a call from Henry about the man they called Dad, but was actually their stepdad. It would catapult them into a conflict that flared for years and nearly destroyed everything they had, but not for the reasons you might expect. Henry's news was horrifying, and he was choked with panic.
And he said, "Javi, come home quick, I killed Dad." And he hung up the phone.
This is Brain Stories, a show about one of the most bewildering mysteries of the human experience, mental illness, told by people who live with it and those who support them. I'm your host, Frank Cosa.
The revolution in Cuba has thrown out the Batista administration, and it has installed a provisional government. The man upon whose strength all this depends is Dr. Fidel Castro, who is here now to face the nation.
Public opinion in Cuba is now very strong and with tremendous force. Nobody is enough.
Xavier Amador was born in Havana, Cuba, just 11 months after Fidel Castro took power in 1959.
And there was still, at that point, there was counter-revolutionary fighting going on. And there were bullets smashing through the hospital windows. And the nurses rushed in. And as, hours-old infant, in my mother's arms, we were tucked under the bed.
Xavier was the youngest of four. His parents were upper-class professionals. His dad was a lawyer like Castro himself, and his mom was a professor of education.
My parents were very pro-Castro. They actually knew him personally. They helped run guns to the rebels in the mountains nearby, Castro's small group. And they cheered along with, millions of Cubans when he, grasped the reins of power.
But when Castro started shutting down churches and suppressing religion, Javier's parents soured on their new government. Both were devout Catholics. Because of these shifting winds, they decided to send their two oldest kids, Henry and John, to live with a host family in Miami. The two brothers were resettled in the United States through a covert effort called Operation Peter Pan. They were part of 14,000 Cuban children who left the country without their parents. At that point, it was the largest organized migration of unaccompanied minors in the history of the Western Hemisphere. Back in Cuba, Javier's dad now actively opposed the government. As a result, he was often arrested, interrogated, and tortured. One day after a particularly brutal interrogation, Javier's dad was dropped off at his home.
Barely able to walk. Got into the house, crawled into my sister's bedroom, told her to go sleep with Mom, and don't tell her. because his neck was all bloodied and he had blood on his face. And my sister, of course, told my mom right away, Papi's not well, Papi's been hurt. And by the time she came into my sister's bedroom, he had already died. And by the next morning, my mother had what she calls a nervous breakdown and ended up going to a hospital herself, a psychiatric hospital, for 6 months. So that next morning, after my father's death, we were picked up by my tío Roberto, my uncle Robert, and we lived with him for those 6 months, with both parents just gone.
When Javier's mother returned from the hospital, she started plotting to leave Cuba. Her best chance, maybe her only chance, was to get a visa to visit her sons John and Henry in the U.S. She kept applying for a visa, but the only permission she ever got was to fly to Miami alone, without Javier and his sister. It was the Cuban government's way of making sure that the visit wouldn't be permanent. This was the height of the Cold War. Defectors were an embarrassment. So her hope of escaping seemed to be dead in the water. But then, a former student went out on a limb to support her.
So this student of hers, who was, well regarded in the Communist Party, vouched for her and said, look, there's nobody to watch her kids. She's going to return.
Based on his word, the government issued visas to Javier, his sister, and his mother. They were all going to fly to Miami together. But when it came time to travel, the government still took every precaution to make sure they couldn't take anything with them that might help start a new life. Only at the airport did Javier's mom realize how harshly those conditions would be enforced.
My mother took off all her jewelry and gave it to a cleaning lady in the bathroom because she saw that they were confiscating all valuables. No paperwork could go with her, no suitcases. So my mom, with me in her arms, almost 3 years old, and my sister boarded this plane. And that's my earliest memory. I remember just sitting on my mother's lap and the anxiety. And I remember how frightened we were that we were going to be taken off the plane. Yeah, not allowed to leave.
They did take off. And when they arrived in Florida, John and Henry were waiting. But the two brothers still had no idea their father had died, because their mom had gone to great lengths to keep it from them.
My mother ghost wrote letters from my father for 6 months. He used to type his letters.
So when the plane arrived at the gate,
well, they were standing against a chain link fence at the Miami airport and saw my mother, my sister, and I get off the plane and no Papi. That's when they discovered. They knew.
The cost of getting out of Cuba had been enormous. They had nothing. No possessions, no papers, no money. And the former student who had gotten them out, he would also pay a terrible price.
This young man who vouched for her ended up doing 6 years in prison because she did not return.
After living in a shoddy hotel room in Miami for a year, Javier and his family moved to Ohio. His mom could only find menial work, a sharp fall from the university professor she'd been in Cuba. In the span of a year, she lost her husband, her home, her career, and now had to raise 4 kids by herself in an English-speaking culture she could barely understand.
We were living in Ohio, which was completely alien, had no similarities to Cuba. And my mother was really struggling with clinical depression, suicidal ideas. And as a 4 and 5-year-old, she would gather me into her arms on her lap and be in tears and saying that God had sent me to her, that if it wasn't for me, she'd kill herself.
Which was a lot of weight for a 5-year-old.
I felt a lot of anxiety that I had to behave perfectly. I had to be a son that caused no trouble. And my mother was a wonderful mother. I don't want to disparage her. And she was suffering tremendously. But she really relied on me in a way emotionally that clearly changed the course of my life.
By the time Javier was 8, his mom remarried. Javier's new stepfather loved his mom, genuinely cared for her kids, and had 4 kids of his own. The families grew close, and eventually the whole clan moved to Tucson, Arizona. They were a Brady Bunch long before blended families became a norm. But out of all his brothers and sisters and stepbrothers and stepsisters, Javier always felt the closest to Henry.
Our relationship from the very beginning was completely different than my other siblings. He was a good listener, and he taught me how to throw a baseball. He taught me how to ride a bicycle. He took me to his baseball games where he was the star pitcher. You know, we were close. But he really listened to me and let me have my feelings.
Javier graduated from high school early, at age 16. And the following year, he started studying psychology at SUNY Purchase in Westchester County, New York. It was there in his senior year that he got the panicked call from Henry, saying that he had killed the man they called Dad. What had actually happened was that their stepfather had gone out for his daily jog. When he didn't return home, Henry was sent to the track to find him. What he found was his stepdad collapsed on the track, dead from a heart attack. But Henry was convinced that he was responsible.
He had a delusion that he had been playing the guitar. The music from the guitar got transmitted into our stepfather's mind, causing him to trip and fall while jogging and hit his head and killed him. So he had tremendous grief. He was suicidal because he was convinced that he had killed our beloved stepfather.
Javier quickly flew back to Tucson. He managed to get his brother admitted to a psychiatric ward, where Henry spent a month, was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and prescribed medication. At the end of the month, they had a family meeting, the one that comes with the discharge plan. The psychiatrist told Henry his diagnosis, and they would have to remain on medication for the rest of his life.
Henry says, yes, I understand. I'll do it. I gather him up. I drive him back home, where my mother is now, a single parent again. And she makes us dinner, and he goes into his room, and I'm doing the dishes. And I open up the cabinet under the sink to throw away something. And what do I find? His bottle of antipsychotic medication.
So Javier stormed into Henry's room.
I opened the door and brandished the bottle and said, what the hell's going on? Why aren't you taking this? And he said, I don't need it. I said, 5 hours ago, you said you needed it. You understood you had schizophrenia. You'd stay on this medication for the rest of your life. What do you mean you don't need it? And he said, well, that was then. This is now. I'm better now.
Javier argued with him, pleaded with him, tried to convince him that he needed help, all to no avail. The two brothers were in a standoff. Javier returned to school and graduated with a psychology degree, and then he moved back to Tucson, where he worked for the local police department's crisis team, an inpatient psychiatric unit, and a halfway house. They were all jobs helping people with a serious mental illness. People like Henry. Javier felt sure that all the experience he gained and was sharing from his work was going to fix his frayed relationship with his brother. He was in for a surprise.
I was trying to teach Henry everything that I was learning about his illness and about what he needed to do. And it just drove us deeper and deeper into division.
The two brothers, who had been so close for so many years, began having the same battle over and over again.
Me telling him he was sick and him saying, I'm not sick. Me saying, you need help. Him saying, I don't need help.
As their relationship worsened, Henry's symptoms also worsened. He heard the voices of God and the devil arguing with one another in his head. He'd already dropped out of college. He didn't have a job, stopped seeing friends, and would stay in his room all day. He became erratic, and in one particularly worrisome incident, he disappeared.
Nobody knew where he was, and it was a good 10 days before I got a call from my stepsister in Ohio that Henry had apparently hitchhiked from Tucson, Arizona to Ohio and showed up at our stepsister, our sister's door. And she didn't know what to do with him. She said, he's acting crazy. He's talking about things that don't make any sense. He's hearing voices. What do I do? And I talked to him and convinced him to get on a bus. I bought a bus ticket and got him back to Arizona. But just not knowing where he was, and he was essentially homeless for those 10 days.
Javier kept trying to get Henry into treatment, but their recurring battle kept recurring. After 3 years of working in Tucson, Javier decided to go to graduate school and moved to New York to get a PhD in clinical psychology. As part of his training there, he worked with patients in the neurology department, people who had physical brain injuries, not mental illness. He was assigned one patient who was paralyzed on his left side as a result of a stroke. According to the man's medical records, he didn't accept his diagnosis of partial paralysis. Javier took on the challenge of trying to prove it to him.
Can you move your arm? Yes. All right, move it for me. Okay. Well, I didn't see it move. What happened? Oh, it moved. Well, you weren't looking, sir. Why don't you look at your arm with me? Let's look at it together and move it one more time. He begrudgingly agrees to do that. It doesn't move. And I'm thinking, okay, he's going to gain some insight that he's got a problem with his arm. Instead, he got angry and paranoid and accused me of putting something in the IV to paralyze his arm. So his belief that he could move his arm was unshakable, even when he was shown 3 separate times that he couldn't move it.
Javier believed that the stroke patient wasn't being stubborn or in denial. Because of the damage to his brain from the stroke, he couldn't perceive that something was wrong with his arm. And no amount of evidence or arguing was going to change that. There's a neurological term for this, a long word with Greek roots called anosognosia. It means the inability to be aware of an illness. It was the first time Javier had seen it in someone with a brain injury. Not long after that, Javier began working at a psychiatric hospital. There, he was given a patient with schizophrenia who had been forced into treatment. And she was angry.
Police brought her to the hospital. It was a mother who called the police, wanted no part of what we were offering. Nothing was wrong with her. You're the crazy one, not me. My mom's the crazy one, not me. These are the kinds of things she was saying. And I was really frustrated with her.
Javier felt himself falling into a combative cycle, much like the one he felt trapped in with his brother. So he went to his supervisor for help.
And he puts his hands up and says, Javier, stop talking. You're not even talking to her. You're talking at her. Start asking her what she wants and what she would like to do about her situation.
Javier went back to the woman. Instead of trying to convince her that she was sick and presenting her with evidence of her illness, Javier did something completely unexpected, even to himself.
I said, I'm really sorry. I really haven't been listening to you. What do you want? And, no big surprise. She said, I want to get the hell out of the hospital. I said, okay. Would you like some help with that? She said, well, if you can help me, yeah. I said, well, I can only think of one way to help you, and that would be if you would take medicine. Well, there's nothing wrong with me. I don't need medicine. And then I can't say I know exactly what I said, but I said something along the lines of, I see your point. And if I were you, I wouldn't want to take it either. Your goal is to get out, and this is the only way I know to get you out. And we ended up partnering on that, and she ended up taking medication that very day.
The woman stayed in treatment and was eventually discharged and continued taking her medication and going to appointments at the outpatient clinic, even though she never actually believed she had schizophrenia. For Javier, this was life-changing.
I had an epiphany. A light bulb went off. It's like I've been doing everything wrong with my brother, just like I was with this woman initially. So I called him up, and I said a couple of things. I said, Henry, I'm sorry for all the times I told you that you had schizophrenia, and I'll never do it again. And I kept that promise. I never said that to him again. And I'm sorry for all the times I told you you needed to take medication, and I'll never tell you that again. And I kept that promise. And that just started a huge shift in our relationship and in our conversations, our interactions.
The beginning of that shift with his brother coincided with a huge shift in his professional life. Javier now had a hypothesis that many people with serious mental illness lack the insight to see it because of a neurocognitive deficit. That is, anosognosia. He did a review of the research to see what had been done on this already and found almost nothing. So he and 4 colleagues published a paper in the medical journal Schizophrenia Bulletin, calling on the research community to investigate.
This paper was a real challenge to the field. We know this is a big problem, that our patients, quote, are in denial. We don't think it's denial. Here's the evidence. We got to go out and study that. We absolutely made a very strong case for why we thought it was anosognosia. And people jumped on it.
In less than 2 years, studies began corroborating Javier's hypothesis. In time, more than 200 papers would confirm and elaborate on the idea that poor insight was a neurocognitive deficit, affecting about 50 to 60% of those living with schizophrenia and about 50% of those with bipolar disorder. It meant that half of those with schizophrenia had little or no awareness that they had it, and their conviction that they were fine was unshakable. A well-known psychiatrist told me this story as an illustration. A man walked into his office who began talking about the angels in the room and how they were flying all around him. The man was in what the psychiatrist called full-blown psychosis, that is, his own reality. So the psychiatrist decided he would videotape the man and show it to him after he'd been on medication for a while so the man could see for himself that the angels were a hallucination. The psychiatrist sent the man off to the hospital for treatment, and when he returned weeks later, no longer in psychosis, the psychiatrist showed him the video. He said, "Do you see now that there aren't any angels?" The man said, "Oh, I never realized that angels don't show up on videotape." And then he said, "But this was helpful, because now I realize that you didn't see them, and that explains why you were so mean and forced me to go to the hospital." For that man, the angels were simply part of his reality, and his response to understanding that others didn't see the angels, that a camera didn't see them, was completely logical. Or to put it in a slightly provocative way, given his reality, his response was perfectly sane. The psychiatrist realized that he would never convince the man that the angels don't exist, and the sooner he stopped trying, the sooner he could start building a relationship that might lead to progress. On top of which was the humbling lesson that the man had an excellent and highly empathic understanding of the psychiatrist, maybe more so than the psychiatrist had had of him. So in the 1990s, the research began confirming that poor insight was a neurocognitive issue, not denial. But for Xavier, that just raised a bigger question.
Part of the struggle I had as I began to understand the problem more and more was, well, what's the solution?
Xavier needed an approach. He knew from his training that a number of very effective techniques for communicating had already been developed. He simply drew on parts of those and wove together a method that could not only work for clinicians, it could be used by anyone. He called it LEAP, the letters L, E, A, and P, standing for listen, empathize, agree, and partner.
So it's founded in actually 3 psychotherapeutic schools of thought, but it really is just common sense human communication. The power of listening, the power of empathy, the power of focusing on areas of agreement, the power of apology.
As an example, Xavier recalled a phone call he had with Henry right after Henry had missed an appointment to take his medication. By then, Henry was getting his medication in a once-a-month shot. Henry reiterated that he didn't have schizophrenia and didn't need medication. But instead of challenging him, Xavier just listened, empathized, and tried to understand Henry's decisions.
I said, well, Henry, if I were you, and this is the LEAP approach, a big part of it is normalizing how the person feels and the decisions they made. I said, if I were you, I would not have gotten the appointment too. And we both laughed about it. And then he said, well, you really want me to go, don't you? I said, well, look, I'm sorry. I even have this opinion because I respect your truth about this, your perspective. You don't need it. Yeah, I have the opinion. I'd like you to go. But whatever you do, I'll respect. And he laughed. Oh, okay, I'll go to the appointment. I said, it's up to you, Henry. He's like, no, I'll go. And that was only one of 2 times he ever missed an appointment in 18 years.
Xavier understands that this can seem backwards. In a logical world, it seems the first step for treating mental illness is recognizing that you have a mental illness.
It's counterintuitive. In psychology, we call it the change paradox. When you stop pushing and you join the person where they're at, they change. Just shut up and listen, and then you win the battle. Shut up, Xavier. Just wait. Why am I talking?
Back when Xavier was arguing with Henry, his brother had no social life, was racked with delusions, and was hospitalized an average of 3 times a year. But after Xavier started using the LEAP approach, everything improved. The incredible bond with Henry that had been so sweet in their early years returned.
I used to fly him out to New York to visit me and have wonderful memories of times we spent together. But we built an outdoor fireplace in our backyard out of Riverstone that's still standing today, that he and I built together. I think of him every time I look at it or build a fire in there. We had our friendship back. We were brothers again.
There's another thing that happened when they got their friendship back. Henry flourished.
He had 2 volunteer jobs. He went to a clubhouse to hang out with those mentally ill people, as he called them, who were really nice people, even though they were mentally ill. He had a girlfriend, you know. I mean, he was in recovery.
Almost 25 years after their stepfather died and Henry made his frantic call to Xavier, their mother died. The woman who got her family out of Cuba, raised her 4 kids for years as a single mom, and took care of Henry when he was at his lowest point. With her death, Henry moved out of the family home to a halfway house nearby. The 2 brothers soon began talking about Henry moving from Tucson to New York, where Xavier was a professor in the psychiatry department at Columbia. Just a month before Henry was set to move, he boarded the city bus, something he often did to get around Tucson.
When he heard or noticed a woman behind him struggling with groceries, he stepped off the bus. He said to her, you go on. And he started handing her groceries.
In just that moment, a car careened onto the sidewalk and struck Henry, taking his life. The driver had lost control of the car due to an apparent diabetic episode.
You know, he was safely on the bus. If he didn't step off the bus and help this woman, she'd be gone, not Henry. But he died being Henry. He died being this kind-hearted, sweet, selfless guy that he was. And I lost sight of that for 7 years when I was telling him he was sick and needed treatment. And I thought he was selfish and immature and uncaring. You know, he was always there. That guy who stepped off the bus to help that woman was always there. Always.
Long before his brother's death, Xavier wrote best-selling books about his relationship with Henry and the LEAP approach to treating mental illness. He's given talks around the world, trained clinicians, family members, and law enforcement, and spearheaded research into his belief that people with mental illness should be listened to rather than argued with. After Henry's death, Xavier set up an obituary page online and was amazed to see comments pour in from people who never knew him.
And I have so many messages from people saying, thank you, Henry. You helped save my son. You helped save my daughter. You helped save my husband. People who had read my book, read Henry's story, you know, Henry's story with his little brother, Javi. And Henry gets as much credit as I do because he stuck it out with me. He could have easily given up on me. He could have said, F you, I want nothing to do with you. You keep saying I'm mentally ill and I'm not. He didn't do that. He gave me a chance to be back in his life. We got each other back because I stopped telling him he was sick and needed to be in treatment and started listening to him about what he wanted.
We don't know what caused Henry to develop schizophrenia. What we know, what Xavier figured out, was how to respond to it. It's all about the relationship. Allies, friends, family. These are some of the most important things in human existence. And mental illness doesn't change that at all. It was groundbreaking to listen, empathize, agree, and partner with someone living with a mental illness. But I think the real surprise is that we ever found this surprising. Because at the end of the day, who doesn't want that? Thanks for listening. If you have a question, a comment, or you want to let us know how you felt about this story, we'd really like to hear from you. So call us and leave a message. Our number is 424-240-9302. If you have a story to share, you can leave that too. But even better, record an audio memo on a phone if you can, and email it to brainstoriesproductions@gmail.com. If you like this episode, share it with your friends, your family, or perfect strangers. You can learn more about Xavier Amador's LEAP approach and his books at the LEAP Institute website at leapinstitute.org. There's also more information on our webpage, brainstoriesproductions.com. Thanks to the team that made this story possible. Our associate producer and editor was Kate Ruscosa. The episode producer was Bowen Wong. His work is terrific, and you can find a link to it at our website. Karen Given was our incredible story editor, and our audio mixer was Rob Byer. The show is executive produced by Frank Kosa and Janet Yang. Thanks to our advisors and all our supporters. Coming up on the next episode of Brain Stories, all Anita wanted was to have Thanksgiving with her entire family. But in addition to her son often being homeless, she was battling something almost impossible to see. Don't miss this episode. This show is a copyright of Brain Stories Productions and the San Bay Corporation. The use of this episode, or any of its content, in any form or way for artificial intelligence, its development or training, is copyright infringement and expressly prohibited without prior written agreement. Bye till next time.